welcome to Crime Stories to Sleep. We're so glad you've joined us. In the comments, let us know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, let's get comfortable and get into our first story. If you want more peaceful nights and fascinating tales, be sure to hit that subscribe button. A highly regarded wilderness ranger vanished during a routine solo journey in 1995. Her unit vehicle was gone, her last radio call cut short, and no trace was ever found. But 11 years later, a surveillance chopper scanning flood-damaged rangelands catches something strange buried in the sand. A discovery that would pull a long-closed file back into the light and expose a chain of silence no one was prepared to face. The Environmental Protection Agency chopper banked low over Sector C7, skimming the edge of a narrow wash scarred by the recent monsoons. Pilot Mark Anderson steadied his grip on the cyclic and leaned toward the canopy. "You seeing that?" he asked his co-pilot. Below, just beyond a collapsed drainage gully, something caught the sun, faint and dull, but unmistakably metallic. The ridge of a roof rack. A vehicle half buried in the silt and brush sat at a crooked angle, its color indistinct under years of dirt. Mark circled once more. The side panel bore a ghosted emblem, U.S. Park Ranger, barely legible. The door code underneath had mostly flaked away, but what remained read 4207. He keyed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Airwatch 27. I've got visual on a buried unit off-grid line 38 near mile marker 81. Code on the door reads 207. Possible Sector 5 vehicle requesting ground confirmation." By the time Sarah Thompson stepped out of the Tahoe, the perimeter was already cordoned off by orange tape and a scatter of EPA personnel in sun-bleached uniforms. Her boots sank slightly in the soft dirt as she crossed toward the excavation site, pausing near a crew crouched around the vehicle's rear. The Chevy Suburban lay half swallowed by the earth, its front end tilted downward into the wash. A backhoe sat idle nearby. 2 men with shovels worked the rear wheel wells. The tailgate still bore the sticker remnants of a Ranger unit, faded so badly the numbers had to be traced with a gloved finger to make them out. A field tech confirmed what dispatch had already relayed. Unit 4207 had been reported missing in June 1995. Superintendent Dave Brewer stood off to the side, arms folded, brow shaded by his wide-brimmed campaign hat. He spotted Sarah and gave a nod, more perfunctory than polite. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "They called me," Sarah replied, eyes on the vehicle. "I didn't volunteer." Brewer's gaze dropped to the excavation. "Some rookie pilot thinks he found a fossil. Probably an old repo unit that got washed off the road back in the day. It was still active when it disappeared," she said flatly. Brewer didn't answer. The vehicle groaned as the rear doors were forced open. Years of sand and corrosion made the hinges brittle. When the latch gave way, dust billowed out like the room temperature breath of a tomb. Sarah pulled her scarf higher over her mouth and stepped closer. Inside, the cargo liner had curled from heat and decay. Dark patches stained the plastic dried brown red. A tech stepped in with a portable light. "This is blood," he said. After a moment, too degraded to tell how much from here, but it pulled might have been there a long time. Sarah stepped back, letting the scene absorb her. No animal signs, no signs of struggle, just time and silence. While one team documented the exterior, another began cataloguing what remained inside. Sarah stood beside the front passenger door, arms crossed as a tech gently pried open the glove box with a flat tool. Out came a sun-warped incident notebook. Pages clumped and yellowed from humidity. The name on the cover was faded, but the faint blue ink on the first page read Reynolds' S date trailed off around mid-June. The cracked stub of a pen was still wedged into the spiral binding. Next, the radio mic snapped at the base, cord frayed, and coiled behind the center console. The final item pulled out was a point for OSNW Park Ranger issued sidearm. The serial number faint, but intact. The magazine, when checked, was half empty. 3 rounds missing, the tech said. Sarah said nothing. She squinted toward the driver's seat. Upholstery long since shredded, dashboard warped under years of heat. The keys were still in the ignition. Brewer reappeared, hands on his hips. "This is going to stir up things that don't need stirring," he said, keeping his voice low. "You know how many Rangers we've had go off radar in that time frame? 12, maybe more. You try tying all of them to foul play, and we'll be buried in paperwork till retirement." Sarah turned toward him. This wasn't a flood. The radio was broken. The gun was drawn. The blood was in the back. You think she abandoned post and dumped her own truck? Brewer exhaled sharply through his nose and looked away. "It's been 11 years, Sarah. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. They'd brought the vehicle out in stages." Sarah watched from the edge of the perimeter as they hooked cables through the rear axle, inching the Suburban up and onto a flatbed. The silence around the operation was thick. No chatter, no idle talk. A junior tech approached her. "You want the log entries tagged separately?" She nodded. "Yeah, bag the whole book. Trace anything you can on the pen, too." He hesitated. "There's an ID number scratched into the back of the notebook. Not sure if it's a case file or a radio call. Could be something. Mark it and copy it. Everything goes to evidence in Phoenix." As he left, Sarah turned back toward the vehicle. One of the rear doors hung slightly ajar. She walked to it, braced a hand on the frame, and looked inside again. The air was dry, but held a staleness she couldn't name. "Let's get it bagged," she said finally. Sarah stood at the counter, waiting as the clerk behind the glass flipped through a set of manila folders. Clearly unimpressed with the urgency on her request form, he looked to be in his late 20s, hair cut fresh, badge clipped too high on his chest. The nameplate read M. Collins. "You said Park Ranger Unit 4207? He asked, frowning. "That's right, Sandra Reynolds." Collins muttered something under his breath and turned around to a low cabinet. After a minute, he returned with a slim file and set it in the tray between them. "That's all we've got from 95. Most of it's on microfiche. But that pole's been in limbo since we moved storage to the new annex." Sarah flipped it open. It was thinner than expected. 4 pages, maybe 5, not including the standard onboarding forms. She was fresh from Prescott, Collins added. Assigned to Sector K near Granite Mountain. Solo vehicle patrol just a few weeks in before she disappeared. "You have her patrol rotation." Collins shook his head. "That would be in the detail rosters. You'll need to request it through dispatch archives." He paused, but fair warning. They usually push back on pre-200 polls, says it jams the system. Sarah sat at a back desk in the archive room with a worn printout of Sector K's radio log from June 17, 1995. Most of the calls were routine check-ins, license checks, weather pings. Sandra's last confirmed call came at 1842. Unit 4207 reporting vehicle. Inspection at Culvert 73 south of Checkpoint Echo. The voice had been transcribed manually. No audio remained. After that silence, no return call, no backup request, just dead air. Sarah scribbled the time and location on her notepad. There wasn't one, the area, he said flatly. Culvert not 73, anyway. Cut through a dry channel. They classified her as AWOL, isolated, 48 hours. Hard to see from the main road. Claimed she probably crossed over. It was notorious for smuggling heavier cargo. He shrugged. Cash, weapons. No one asked. People with names. Back at the station, even now, Sarah pulled the paper shift logs. Rangers patrolled it. and
the
never
forms
alone.
were photocopies.
She flipped
lined
back
in
to the
faded
vehicle
blue
roster.
ink.
That day's
The
road
one from
had
June
her heading
17th
east, showed Sandra
standard
clocked in
sweep
at 14
but
o'clock
the log
hours.
showed her veering 2 miles
Dispatch
south
noted
around
her
17:20
as patrolling Sector K.
No explanation.
GRID reference
Sarah found
449
Roberts at a used tire shop. He ran
ran
out of a side lot.
The
in
log
Flagstaff.
was signed off at the bottom.
He was hunched over a wheel
Supervisor
balancer.
C. Miller,
hands stained with
Sarah
grease
made
and
a mark
age.
beside his name. When she introduced
kept
herself
reading.
and explained the case,
Reynolds
he
had
wiped his
logged a
palms on a
single
towel
infield
and
stop
leaned
at
against the counter.
1635 routine
I remember
tire check
Reynolds
on a
he
94
said.
Ford pickup.
Young,
Quiet.
the plate number had
didn't
been
drink,
transcribed,
didn't
but
gossip,
no citation
got
issued.
assigned out of sequence.
Then the final entry,
But that
1842,
happened a lot back then.
Culvert
Her
73.
route changed the day she
After
disappeared.
that, the page went
You
blank.
remember why?
She traced
No
the signal
idea.
signature,
Roberts replied.
same hand
The
on all
assignments
pages
were
that
manual.
week. Miller again.
Miller handled that week's
The dispatch
archive room was a windowless
Calvin
bunker,
Miller,
2 floors
Roberts
down.
nodded.
Hair
Yeah,
thick with the
transferred
smell of
out a
disused
few years
electronics and binder
Quiet
dust.
guy.
A
Kept
junior
to himself.
analyst named Terry Holcomb. Sarah pulled
Keyed
out a
in her
copy of the
badge
presumed
and led
resignation
Sarah past
letter.
rows of
Sandra's family
outdated
had
reel-to-reel
received.
units,
You
stacked
signed
like
this.
museum pieces.
Roberts squinted.
We've got most of the 90s
Doesn't
backed
look
up
like
on
my
reel,
pen,
she said.
probably drafted
But
by
the summer of
admin and
95
pushed
had
through.
issues. We didn't
Equipment
exactly make a
failure.
show of missing
What
persons
kind
back
of
then.
failure? Holcomb tapped a metal case labeled Q3195. This quarter's tapes were marked unreadable. Heat damage. Compressor went out, and no one caught it until it fried a shelf of recordings. All of them, mostly Sector K and L. The rest was salvageable. Sandra Reynolds was in K. Holcomb gave a sympathetic look. Yeah, I saw that on the pull request. Nothing came up. Sarah stared at the cabinet for a long moment, then nodded. Can I get the serial numbers of the compromised reels? Holcomb opened a logbook and jotted down a sequence of alphanumeric tags. Here you go. Back outside. Sarah sat in her rental window, cracked just enough to let the heat bleed out. She laid the papers across the passenger seat. Sandra's file, the log sheets, her final radio call, a missing tape, a rerouted patrol, a solo assignment near a known smuggling corridor. No search, a resignation letter sent to the family. None of it held together. If Sandra Reynolds had walked away, she hadn't planned it, and someone had made sure no one came looking. Do you believe it's just a coincidence that the archives containing Sandra's last known patrol records were damaged by heat? Or is someone going to great lengths to bury the truth? Comment below. Can Sarah uncover the full truth and bring justice to a fellow ranger lost in the line of duty? Or will the evil win again? Tap that like button and stay with us, because what happens next changes everything. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from today. Sarah stood at the administrative desk in the Phoenix Field office, signing the authorization form with a controlled hand. The case number had been dormant since 1995. She marked the final checkbox. Reclassified suspicious circumstances. Once filed, it would trigger notifications to internal records. Oversight and chain of command, whether they wanted them or not. She dropped the form in the tray and stepped into Brewer's office without knocking. He was on the phone mid-sentence, but paused when he saw her. I'll call you back, he muttered, and hung up. It's reopened, she said. Brewer leaned back in his chair. Mean what? Sandra Reynolds' disappearance is now classified under suspicious circumstances. The report goes up tonight. Brewer tapped a capped pen on the desk, eyes fixed on hers. You better know what you're kicking up. I do, she said. That's why I'm doing it. He didn't respond. The silence hung too long to be neutral. Sarah was combing through the secondary witness folder when she spotted it. A single handwritten statement, misfiled behind a report on tire thefts from '96. The page was curled at the edges, written in tight block letters. Saw Park Ranger SUV, slow roll, west of fence. 8:30 maybe. Looked like Reynolds' rig. Another SUV behind it. Black, no plate. Sat there a while. Not PR. Waited for the first one to pass, then followed. Signed, Our Galvin Ranch 43. She checked the official interview log. The public report listed 0 credible civilian sightings. No mention of Robert Galvin at all. Robert Galvin lived alone now, out past the old Sunset line. His ranch house sat back from the road, weathered but orderly. He answered the door, wearing a sweat-darkened hat and a flannel shirt buttoned to the top. "You're the first law to come out here about that in what, a decade," he said once she introduced herself. "I'm not here for the ranch. I'm here for what you saw." He invited her onto the porch, poured lukewarm water from a jug. They sat without ceremony. "I said what I saw back then. They told me it didn't fit." He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. "But I remember." "Tell me again." "I was checking fence line west of mile marker 41. It was just turning dark. Saw one of your trucks, green Suburban like they all were back then, roll by slow. I recognized the light bar. Park rangers don't drive slow for nothing out here. And the other vehicle, blacked out Tahoe or Suburban. No plate, tinted windows, parked behind my irrigation trailer for 20 minutes at least. Didn't move until the PR rig passed by, headed south. Then it pulled out and followed." He looked at her. "Didn't feel right. Did you report it?" "To the field office. Told a supervisor. I forget his name. Never heard back." "Was it Calvin Miller?" "That's it. Quiet guy." Sarah closed her notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Galvin." She returned to the evidence catalogue later that evening, requesting access to Sandra's weapon file. The chain of custody ledger listed it as logged June 20th, 1995, under temporary retention. It was marked with a basic inventory tag and a placeholder serial field. Pending. No follow-up. No confirmation of match. No notation that the weapon had ever been test-fired or catalogued for ballistics. Just a final line in red ink. Destroyed. Standard clearance 1999. Sarah checked the destruction log. The box number listed was missing from the archive manifest. In a basement storage drawer sandwiched between backlog travel reimbursements and weather dispatch forms from Section 996. Sarah found it an unsigned internal complaint sheet, faded and misaligned in a copier. Dated June 4th, 1995, 2 weeks before Sandra vanished. The complaint described a suspected unlawful detainment en route near a defunct water tower 3 miles east of the assigned patrol zone. The writer stated they'd witnessed a group of individuals being held without formal processing. No record, no transport call, no backup logged. The details were sparse but specific. Time of day, approximate number of detainees, a physical description of one of the unmarked vehicles on scene. It ended with a single sentence. "We'll follow up in person if not addressed." Sarah checked the name field. Blank, but the handwriting matched the notes in Sandra's incident book, now drying in a field lab across town. The EPA operations wing was mostly empty by the time she made it up there. Sarah flagged down a technician she'd worked with before, Leo Carnes, a forensic analyst who did quiet work fast. "You pulled the log tapes for me last week," she said. Carnes nodded. "Yeah, didn't find much." "Not your fault," she said. "But something's missing." He glanced around, then leaned closer. When she disappeared, things shifted. Not just the logs. Her shift data got reassigned, archived differently. 2 vehicles that week had their maintenance history scrubbed. I was an intern then. Still remember it. It was quiet, but intentional. "You ever say anything?" "I did once. Got reassigned to inventory tracking for 3 years. Sarah stepped back, nodded. "Thanks. Be careful," he added. This wasn't some botched report. It was cleaned on purpose. Someone inside had known what Sandra saw, and they made sure it never made it past her shift. Sarah's next target was Miller.
She didn't approach Calvin Miller directly. She waited. After confirming his transfer to the Fish and Wildlife Field Office in San Diego, she watched his routine unfold across 3 days. He left work precisely at 6:10 p.m., never glanced over his shoulder, kept to the center lane, took the same exit toward a strip of older warehouses, now used mostly for storage. On the 4th night, he deviated. She followed 2 car lengths behind, into the east end of a commercial park, where a tan sedan idled at the corner of a tire shop. Miller didn't park close. He circled, checked his mirrors, then pulled in 2 spaces down. Sarah pulled around to the opposite lot, behind a row of faded vending machines, out of sight. Through her windshield, she watched Miller climb into the passenger seat. The driver was familiar, wide-shouldered, posture sharp, even-seated. Brewer, she angled the parabolic mic through the crack in her passenger window. The pickup range was short, but the lot was quiet. At first, only ambient fuzz, then fragments. You told me that sector was clear, not supposed to surface. Not after the big deal. Pulling the thread now. Don't know. I didn't log it. Miller's voice was tight, defensive. Brewer's was flat and low, almost rehearsed. Sarah adjusted the dial. If they push this, it's all going to unravel. We clean it up, just like before. She clicked off the mic, backed out, and disappeared down a side road. Just past midnight, Miller's SUV turned off onto a private road, leading to what had once been a pumping station. Sarah followed at distance, no lights, parking a quarter-mile out and walking the rest by moonlight. From a nearby ridge, she watched as Miller stepped out with a plastic bin clutched tight in both hands. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the old well casing capped in concrete, but a narrow runoff pipe remained open. He slid the bin into the shaft. It caught for a moment, then dropped. He left without looking back. By 8 a.m., she was at the San Diego County Sheriff's Office, requesting assistance under a DOJ request for a cooperation clause. The deputies who accompanied her were discreet and efficient. By noon, the box was pulled from the well. The edges were scorched. Inside, charred remnants of personnel logs, a laminated park ranger shift sheet, and fragments of a patrol road hand map. The ink bled through in places, but one name stood out. Reynolds S. circled twice in red. Sarah didn't speak. She just took the sheet and sealed it in a fresh evidence bag herself. Later that day, Sarah stopped by a regional substation looking for processing records from 1995. She was browsing the rooms, intake binders, when a young ranger knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Ma'am," he said. She turned. He stepped inside, checking over his shoulder first. "You're the one working the Reynolds file." "That's right." He pulled something from his jacket. A compact black cassette tape, the kind used in old field recorders. "This was in my locker this morning. I don't know how it got there, but I think someone wants it heard." She took it. "What's your name?" "Eli Vargas," he said. "And you didn't get that from me." She borrowed a tape deck from the station's archive room. It took 2 tries to find one that still worked. The tape clicked into place with a rattle. The audio was degraded, fluttering, and uneven, but the voices came through in short bursts. Sandra's voice was unmistakable. "I'm not covering this." Pause. Static. "You're not hearing me. I'll file it myself, if you won't." Another voice, low and male. "You need to think about what you're doing." Sandra again, clearer this time. "I already have the tape cut out." Sarah ejected it slowly, slid it into a padded evidence sleeve, and wrote Sandra's name on the label. Eli Vargas didn't ask questions when Sarah handed him a map and a pair of long-range binoculars. He just checked his watch and nodded. "You want eyes on it, or movement log. Both, Sarah said. Watch for any unmarked vehicles. No photos, no texts, just timestamps and plates. The target was a comms relay tower decommissioned in 1997, sitting outside a scrub patch north of Santa Fe. Officially, the tower had been phased out with the system overhaul, but locals still called it Relay 9. The base of the structure had been reinforced with cinder block in the late 80s, likely to support transmission gear. Eli knew what that meant. People say it was used for off-grid processing, he asked. Sarah nodded. And worse, he looked over the map again. Give me a few hours. Sarah met him just before dusk, keeping her Tahoe parked behind a line of mesquites. The tower's frame creaked faintly in the wind. Metal rusted through the lattice joints. No power lines fed it now. No guards, no visible surveillance. The place has been cold for years, Eli said. But the door has been open recently. Sand shift at the threshold. Someone comes through. Not regular, they entered without flashlights. The base chamber was empty, except for some leftover cabling and a cracked folding table. Dust settled heavily on everything except the far corner where an electrical panel sat loose in its hinges. Sarah popped the panel open with a pen light between her teeth. Inside, tucked behind a conduit pipe, was a sealed EPA evidence pouch. It was heat-sealed and marked with a faded internal barcode. She slid it out carefully. Inside, a tarnished park ranger badge, ID tag cracked but legible. The number read 7391 Kevin Avery. The name hit hard. Sarah didn't know Avery, but she knew the case. He was reported drowned near Falcon Lake in 1994. His truck had been found stuck in the mud. Nobody ever recovered. She ran the badge number through internal systems the next morning. The case summary was 2 paragraphs long. A single-page report filed by a field supervisor. No autopsy, no dive recovery, no incident report longer than a coffee receipt. What stood out wasn't the brevity. It was the timing. Avery had filed a misconduct notice weeks before he vanished. A handwritten complaint about irregular detainments and off-route transports. Same phrasing Sandra used. Sarah spread the files across her motel wall. For officers from 1993 to 1996. Avery, Reynolds, Paul S., Lucille R., all listed as voluntary terminations, presumed accidents, or internal resignations. All with known patrol shifts near unmonitored grid points. All had filed disciplinary reports in the months leading up to their disappearances. Some pages were photocopied so many times the ink had blurred. Others had redacted blocks in awkward places, cutting off context mid-sentence. What wasn't there said as much as what remained. She marked a common element in red ink across each corner. No follow-up, no body, no inquiry. Brewer was speaking at a joint press event for a community outreach campaign when Sarah confronted him. Sarah didn't wait for the mic to pass. She moved to the side of the podium, catching his eye. He hesitated, mid-sentence, voice faltering only slightly, then continued. She waited. When he stepped off stage, she fell into step beside him. "How many more did you bury?" she asked quietly. Brewer didn't blink. "Excuse me. You know who Kevin Avery was? You know what happened at Relay 9? He stopped walking. I don't know what you're talking about. Reynolds S. R. Their names are still on inactive payrolls with no retirement, no death certificates, no processing, just silence." Brewer's face didn't shift, but his voice did. Lower, flatter. "Be careful before you make serious accusations." She met his stare. "They're not accusations. They're connections." Then she walked away, leaving him watching her go, surrounded by applause he no longer seemed to hear. That night,
Sarah composed an encrypted message with a copy of the badge photo, the burned roster, and notes on the Relay 9 discovery. She sent it to a former DOJ colleague who'd worked internal affairs in fish and wildlife before transferring out. It wasn't formal yet, just a whisper through the right channel. By morning, she had a callback request and a vague confirmation. Your package landed with interest. Quiet interest. Don't lose that badge. That was enough to keep moving. The message came through her burner at 3:17 p.m. The voice was male, hushed, and had a faint desert accent. You're looking for the one who vanished near Granite Mountain. Who is this? You don't need the name. Listen. Sarah waited. A trafficker who used to run with Mando Zayas said a woman agent chased a transport by mistake in 95, one of theirs. Sandra, he said, she followed a decoy route north of Sector L. They called it Low Negro. But it wasn't the traffickers that got her. What do you mean? Someone else was waiting. Traffickers left her alone. Said she was too close to someone's private space. Sarah's pen stilled. Whose but the line disconnected. Sarah was reviewing topographic overlays of the relay tower grid when the motel phone rang. She answered, Thompson. A man's voice came through gravelly and low. You're the one asking about the relay site. That's right. Who's this? I used to work maintenance, contracted in 95 for tower cooling units before they shut it down. There was a pause, then I was told to backfill a pit by the base south-facing side. Didn't ask what was in it. Who told you? Didn't leave a name, left cash. Said it was a drainage hazard. Why now? I kept quiet because I thought it was traffickers. But what you're digging up? I don't think it was them. Sarah sat forward. Where exactly? The slope east of the outer wall, 3 feet down under a runoff grate. It's probably shifted by now. The line disconnected. Sarah called in a favor from Hud Wallace, a county forensic tech she trusted. Hud had worked burn pit excavations back in 98 and knew how to move without raising noise. They arrived at the site before sunrise. The truck was marked Site Survey, Structural Risk Assessment, with a magnetic logo. Sarah peeled off the side as soon as they parked. Hud opened the rear hatch, handed her a folding spade. What are we looking for? Canvas sealed, buried, shallow, mid-90s. They started at the slope near the base of the tower. The sand was tight-packed, but visibly different, coarser, with an uneven texture where water had once pooled. At 32 inches, Sarah struck something dense. She set the shovel down and dropped to her knees, brushing back the layers by hand. Canvas, she glanced at Hud. Mark this. Camera out, they worked methodically, exposing the outline of a large duffel bag, zippered, sun-bleached, but intact. Sarah reached into the side seam and pulled it open. The air inside was stale, dry, and sour. Inside, wrapped in a deteriorated military poncho, were human remains, partially mummified, limbs folded awkwardly to fit the space. Duct tape bindings still clung to the wrist bones. Sarah stepped back, steadying her breath. Hud, now gloved, peeled back a layer near the torso. Nestled in the rib cage was a shattered badge, partially fused from heat. Sarah didn't need to read it. She already knew who it belonged to, Sandra. They bagged the remains carefully, layer by layer, preserving anything not yet eroded by time. When Hud rolled back the poncho collar, something small tumbled out. A silver wristwatch cracked. Hands stopped at 1916. The county lab was cold and sterile. Coroner Alicia Frey reviewed the scan results as she spoke. Voice matter-of-fact, but not indifferent. Female height and dental consistent with Reynolds. Taphonomic decay lines up with a mid-June exposure window. Sarah stood behind the glass, arms crossed,
unmoving. Cause of death? She asked. Frey clicked to a cross-section of the thoracic vertebrae. Gunshot wound to the spine. Entry from upper back downward trajectory. No exit. Execution style. Close range, less than 3 feet. No stippling but consistent angle and residue pattern. Sarah nodded once. Frey added. We found a partial round lodged in L2. It's degraded, but the alloy and groove spacing match point 4 or West Park Ranger issue from the period. Anything to ID the weapon. No serials, too damaged. But I can tell you what it's not. Not traffickers. Their ammo from that era was 9mm surplus. No plating. This is internal. Internal issue weapon, Sarah said aloud. Not to Frey, but to the silence between them. She held the watch again in her hand back at the motel. The band was worn leather. The casing was cracked from impact, but the second hand still hovered over 1916. Sarah opened Sandra's old radio log again. The last confirmed radio ping, 1842. No further contact after that. Dispatch timestamp ended at 1859. 17 minutes. That's all she had between her last location and her death. At midnight, Sarah composed the memo in a secured session. She attached autopsy findings, ballistic comparisons, time-stamped excavation photos, and the recovered badge. She encrypted it with DOJ-grade compression and addressed it to the same contact who had greenlit her last drop. 5 days later, a response came through a private call channel. This is R.J. Manning. You sent the Reynolds file. That's right. Task force approved. Quiet scope, oversight only. How quiet? No press. No local cooperation yet. First stage is intel sweep. And Brewer, a pause. His name just landed on the red list. Sarah stared at the ceiling of the motel room. Her voice didn't shift. Then I'll keep digging. It wasn't hard to find him now. Sarah waited until just after sundown. Parked along the back lot of the San Diego field office where Miller had recently been transferred. No longer cleared for field work. No badge on his chest. Just a weather-faded polo and EPA ID clipped to a belt loop. When he stepped out, the carry-out bag hanging from one hand, Sarah moved fast. She met him at the bumper of his car. We need to talk. He blinked. I'm not supposed to. She pulled a clear pouch from her coat pocket. Sandra's cracked wristwatch. The hands frozen at 1916. Then a sealed evidence container with a warped bullet fragment. Then a copy of a logbook page bearing his initials. You were the last to sign her in, Sarah said. And you're going to be the first to help me to pull this thing wide open. His lips parted, but no sound came out. She saw the panic spark behind his eyes. He didn't run. That was enough. They used a side office in the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Station. No mirrors, no cameras, just a recorder, a man unraveling, and a woman who knew how to listen. Miller sat across from Sarah, sweat bleeding through his collar. I'm not wired, she said. You speak freely. You help me get the truth in writing, and maybe you walk out of this with your life intact. He nodded faintly. Tell me about the tower. His first words barely came out. She wasn't scheduled for that patrol. Who rerouted her? Brewer, he said, eyes down. Told dispatch she was reassigned. Only a few people knew. Sarah didn't blink. Why that sector? Because of what we were doing out there. That tower was used for unsanctioned processing. Off the books, no chain of custody. Migrants came in through a known corridor, was separated before entering into the system. Who was involved? Some wore our uniforms. Some were traffickers. He drank again, spilling a few drops onto the table. She called me, he said after dark. Said she heard voices inside the tower. Movement.
She hadn't filed a report yet. Wanted me to come take a look before she escalated it. What did she find? Cells, he whispered, built right into the concrete foundation. Just 1 or 2 people inside. Kids mostly. No tags, no files. She said they'd been there for days. Sarah kept her voice steady. She planned to report it. She said if I wouldn't, she would. And Brewer, he showed up 20 minutes later, told me to clear out. Said she didn't know what she was walking into. Miller's hands clenched together. She was pacing outside. Her weapon was holstered, but her jaw was locked. Brewer kept telling her it was an authorized operation, that if she filed anything, the fallout would take her family down, too. He paused. She said no. Turned around to get in her truck. What happened? I left, he said hollow. Brewer stayed behind. I waited by the ridge. Minutes later, I heard a gunshot. She didn't check in the next day. No report, no emergency flag. Brewer filed an absence as unauthorized leave. Said she quit. And you? I got a call from a secure line told to meet him at the base of Relay 9. He had a tarp in the back of his unit. She was inside it, already gone. Sarah didn't interrupt. She let the weight of silence stretch. You altered the logs, yes. Changed the time stamp. Filed it 2 days late to make it look like she never checked back in. Forged to supervisor initials. Your idea. Brewer gave me the paper. I just did what I was told. Sarah placed a file in front of him. Headshot, missing persons reports, official memos, half redact. You recognize these names? He nodded without hesitation. Avery flagged discrepancies in intake manifests are filed. A misconduct notice after being ordered to delay transport to central processing. Paul S. started asking about fuel receipts tied to ghost vehicles. None of them lasted the year. Sarah flipped a page. What about support roles? Miller exhaled. Nathan Caudry, EPA Logistics. He moved supplies no one ever saw. Jacob Hanley, Sheriff's Deputy from Val. He handled highway escorts for unmarked vans. Federal. Not officially, but you'd never know from the credentials. They were planted. She circled 2 names on her list. And the traffickers. He nodded. They paid us not to interfere, not to dig, not to ask questions. An hour later, she walked him to the side exit. A black SUV waited with a federal marshal behind the wheel. No lights, no insignia. Miller didn't ask where they were going. He climbed into the back seat, head bowed, and never looked back. Sarah stood on the curb, arms crossed. The confession was real, but the machine it described was larger than any one man. This was just a crack in the dam. Something or someone darker was still behind it. Sarah knew exactly who. The drive to Los Angeles took 6 hours with Sarah, making only one stop to refill her tank and check in with her DOJ contact. She didn't rehearse what she'd say. There was no script for this. Eric Reynolds answered the door with a quiet weariness. He looked like a man who'd lived the last 11 years between hope and resignation. Early 50s, weather-beaten face. He recognized the badge clipped to Sarah's hip before he even said hello. You with the Rangers? He asked, voice flat. No, Sarah said. Used to be. Now, I'm with Doge Task Force Rotation. His eyes dropped to the manila folder in her hand. You're here about Sandra? She didn't answer. Just opened the folder and took out the evidence pouch. Inside the silver wristwatch. Cracked face stopped at 1916. Eric looked at it for a long time, then gave a single nod. You found her, didn't you? Sarah sat with him in the small kitchen while he stared at the table. He exhaled through his nose. They said she ran,
that she abandoned her post. My father believed it. Didn't even go to the memorial the station held. Said she'd embarrassed us. Sarah waited. But she didn't run, did she? His voice cracked. She tried to do right. She did. He nodded again, this time slower. The tears came in silence, not from rage, but release. Sarah stayed seated across from him, saying nothing, watching a weight years in the making finally slide off someone else's shoulders. I knew it, he said quietly. Even back then, she would have said goodbye. Back in San Diego, Sarah received a padded envelope with no return address. The postmark traced back to love. Inside, 5 grainy time-stamped photographs from 1995. No note. She recognized Sandra in one of them, wearing her duty uniform, standing near the base of the old Combs Tower. Her expression was unreadable. Beside her stood 3 men, faces angled away from the camera. 2 wore tactical pants, no patches. One had a park ranger windbreaker, but the insignia was off. Sarah noticed it immediately. The wrong font, wrong positioning. Like it was made for appearances, not legitimacy. She ran facial recognition through internal archives. Nothing, no names, no hits. But he told her all she needed. Sandra wasn't alone. She was being watched long before she vanished. It started with a smell, acrid and creeping. Sarah had just slid into her cruiser after a late call with her DOJ liaison when the smoke started rising through the vents. She threw open the door, dropped to the asphalt, and watched the front end burst into flame. The fire crew arrived 7 minutes later. They didn't need long to figure out it wasn't electrical. An accelerant had been poured beneath the steering column, likely through the air intake grill. Ignition timed or remote triggered. Arson back at the station. The response was subdued. "You're making enemies," said the acting captain, a man named Milt Connors. "Big ones. We've had feds come through before, but nobody's ever pulled threads like you." She didn't reply. She had just signed the incident report and requested a replacement vehicle. Sarah drove to the outskirts of Lake Tahoe and parked near the truckway station. Cell reception was patchy, but her DOJ contact picked up on the second ring. She didn't ease into it. "They burned my unit. I'm compromised. Understood." The voice on the other end said, "We've been expecting pushback. I need authorization for tactical support. Brewer's people aren't covering their tracks anymore." A pause. "Then you'll get 1 team, 4 agents, 2 vehicles, no press, no paper trail. You get 1 chance to make this stick. That's all I need." The call ended without pleasantries. She stared out at the desert for a long time, then picked up the motel landline and dialed another number. "Miller, yeah." His voice was groggy, like he hadn't slept in days. "You told me they met off-grid sometimes. You remember where?" There was a pause on the other end. Not hesitation, calculation. "Staging shack, old park utility outpost, mile marker 218, and just past Red Cut Wash. It's been abandoned since 96, but Brewer always liked using places with dirt floors. Easier to clean, you sure?" "I'm sure." Sarah jotted the coordinates and stared at them for a long beat. There was no walking this back. The old staging shack at mile marker 218 hadn't seen traffic in years. Once used to stock bottled water and first aid kits for patrol units. Now it was a rusting shell surrounded by sand, mesquite, and memory. No cell reception, no cameras, no lights for miles. Perfect for people who didn't want to be seen. Sarah arrived first with Deputy U.S. Marshal Rob Tieran. Lean, mid-40s, minimal words, but solid. They were joined by 2 tactical agents from the DOJ team, Agent Wolf and Agent Monroe.
They kept the perimeter wide, running silent comes through analog earpieces, not trusting digital lines. Everyone had studied the approach routes. There'd be no second chances. Inside her SUV, Sarah clutched the burner phone Miller had used to bait Brewer into the meet. The message was simple. Old papers need moving before the audit. Usual place, no delays. Brewer confirmed within 20 minutes. 1 hour later, his reply pinged the relay. 218, it is 1 extra joining. Keep it clean. She looked at the time. Las 9:44 de la noche, Aneta 10. Tyron muttered beside. He checked his sidearm, then nodded toward the field scope mounted on a tripod. Lights west end. They all went quiet. At 21:54, a dust-covered SUV pulled up just shy of the shack shadow line. A late-model Chevy Tahoe outstepped Superintendent Dave Brewer. Tan slacks, black windbreaker bowl cap pulled low. He walked slowly, scanning the perimeter before heading toward the shack. 2 minutes later, a second vehicle rolled up. This one older, unmarked, desert-worn, tags covered in dust. A man stepped out wearing jeans and a lightweight jacket. He carried a military-style duffel over one shoulder. Sarah zoomed the scope. The man was mid-50s, stocky with close-cut hair. No identifying patches, no badge. Unidentified males, a courier, she said into the mic, proceeding to meeting. The two met near the shack's edge, voices low. Monroe, posted behind a ridge with a directional mic, whispered, getting fragments. Audits not clean. Move what's left. Shred lists before rotation. Then, did you burn the cruiser? Brewer's voice clear. I did what had to be done, the other man replied. There was a pause. Call it, Sarah said. Taryn moved first. Flanking wide, he raised his service weapon. U.S. Marshals, don't move. From the other side, Wolf and Monroe swept in, rifles drawn, angles locked. Sarah emerged from her SUV and approached fast. Brewer froze, but the courier ran, tossing the duffel and cutting through a ditch toward the far slope. Runner, Wolf barked. North edge, Tiran gave chase. The courier made it 40 yards before a tackle brought him down hard. Sand kicked up. Sarah heard the metallic click of cuffs locking. Back by the shack, Brewer stood perfectly still, hands raised. He didn't look surprised. Sarah stepped in, weapon drawn, but lowered. Dave Brewer, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and the murder of Agent Sandra Reynolds. He didn't argue. Just said, you made it further than most. You left a trail. You don't know the half of it. That's what court's for. He smirked once, then turned around, wrists presented, and let them cuff him. Inside the duffel were printed ledgers, handwritten intake logs dated between 1993 and 1996. One listed names. Most had no assigned case numbers. Besides, some were faint red X's. There were other items. A VHS tape labeled relay footage, the 11th of May 95. A half-melted badge, 2 rolls of undeveloped film, and several slips of paper with cash, drop amounts, dated, and initial. One of the initials matched Brewer's handwriting from old logs. It was enough to break open the full case. The DOJ moved fast. Charges filed within 48 hours. Brewer was held without bail in a federal detention facility in Phoenix. His attorneys filed for delay, citing health concerns, denied. Miller was moved to a safe facility and entered into a sealed plea deal. His testimony led to 2 more arrests, 1 former EPA contractor, 1 sheriff's deputy. Both caught tampering with internal migration records from the mid-90s. At trial, Brewer maintained his innocence, claimed Sandra overreacted to operations meant to contain the situation in a dangerous era, but the jury didn't buy it. The confession,
physical evidence, and recovered remains made it airtight. He was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to obstruct justice, falsification of government records, and second-degree murder of a federal officer. Sentencing life without parole. Miller got 30 years, eligible for parole in 20. It was a Tuesday in February. The wind was light, sky clear, the ground dry and hard. The burial took place in a private plot north of Los Angeles, modest, shaded by mesquites, no press, no color guard. Her brother Eric stood with one hand on the coffin. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. Sarah remained off to the side. She stayed through the burial, through the final prayer, through the silent dispersal that followed. When Eric turned to go, he stopped at her shoulder. "You did right by her," he said. Sarah gave a single nod. She deserved justice. Then she watched him walk back to his truck and drive away without looking back. On a warm spring morning, Sarah packed the last box from her assigned DOJ quarters. Her rotation was up. The investigation was over. She left her badge behind. She drove out of San Diego in silence, windows half down, wind threading through the cabin. The desert rolled beside her like an old scar. Somewhere past mile marker 224, a fresh green and white park ranger unit crested the opposite hill. Sarah caught it in her periphery. A young woman behind the wheel, 22 maybe, straight-backed, alert. The radio buzzed softly at her shoulder. As they passed each other, the agent nodded. Sarah returned the gesture without slowing and thought to herself. They buried her in the desert and buried the truth with her. But the earth doesn't forget, and neither do the people who refuse to let corruption win. Sandra Reynolds died doing her job the right way. Not to make headlines, not for a pension, but because silence was never an option for her. Her legacy lives on in every ranger who chooses duty over comfort, truth over convenience, and the law over the men who think they can bend it. That's the job if you still believe in it. Story 2 in 1996. A rising criminal defense attorney vanished without a trace after her car was found near a bridge. Everyone assumed she had jumped to her death until 7 years later. A briefcase buried in mud, and time was found by boys fishing along a riverbank, reigniting a case the city had quietly forgotten. The Wilshire River had calmed after a week of heavy rains, but along the low banks, clusters of debris clung to the edges. Branches, plastic bags, bits of fencing. A trio of boys from Windsor Peak Middle School had ducked out of class with second-hand rods and the promise of a good catch. They weren't supposed to be there. That was half the fun. One of them, Cody Martin, noticed a dark rectangular shape half buried beneath a mat of roots. He stepped off the rock ledge and nudged it with the toe of his sneaker. It didn't move. "I think it's a briefcase," he said, crouching down. "No way," muttered Alex, the oldest of the three. "Probably trash." But it wasn't. Once they tugged it free, its weight startled them. The corners were scuffed raw. The latches rusted. One side warped as if it had been crushed. Cody unhooked the latch with effort. When it opened, the smell hit them first. Earthy, stale, something like mildew and paper rot. Inside were fragments of once white pages fused together, ink stains bleeding across them. Beneath the mess, tucked into a crumbling folder, was a laminated card. Alex pulled it out and read it aloud. Jasmine Black, attorney at law. They stared at each other. The name didn't mean anything to them, but the title did. They carried the briefcase to the edge of the road and flagged down a passing officer's cruiser. Officer Anderson took it with a nod, glanced at the ID, and loaded it into the trunk. He might have dismissed it until the name registered in his memory. 2 hours later, it landed on a detective's desk in Oakwood County. Detective Sarah Evans had only been with the Oakwood County Sheriff's Department for 6 weeks. Her last assignment had been in Saratoga, violent crimes. She wasn't especially sentimental, nor did she come to the cold case division looking to reinvent herself. But there was a steadiness in unsolved things that suited her. When the briefcase came in, it was logged as recovered property, mud-caked, degraded, contents uncertain. Evans glanced through the report quickly. What caught her eye wasn't the disintegrated contents, but the bar card still intact enough to verify. "Jasmine Black," she murmured, setting the printout aside. She tapped into the department archive. The file number came up cold. 96-1042. The archived case notes were brief. Missing person, female, age 36, criminal defense attorney. Last seen June 19th, 1996. Car found parked on the Cedar Ridge Bridge. Doors unlocked. No sign of a struggle. No suicide note. No confirmed witnesses. After a week of searching, authorities leaned toward voluntary disappearance, possibly suicide. The family declined further press. Case was marked inactive by full. Evans sat back in her chair. She skimmed the summary twice. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed in a request to retrieve the physical file from deep storage. 2 hours later, she had it in her hands. The next morning, Evans attended the morning briefing, waiting until the end to ask her question. "Anyone here remember Jasmine Black?" she asked. A few raised brows, but no immediate response. Finally, Sergeant Douglas, the most senior in the unit, rubbed his chin. "Lawyer, right? Took on a lot of dirty cases." Her car showed up on the bridge. That was a weird one. "Why'd they close it?" Evans asked. Body never turned up. No new leads. Did anyone check what cases she was working? Not that I know of. "You're saying this is worth digging up?" Evans didn't answer directly. She simply stood holding up a printed photo of the briefcase found by the river. How'd her briefcase end up downstream, miles away from where her car was found? Douglas shrugged. Maybe it just fell. She didn't press further, but the thought stuck. June 1996. Jasmine Black stood in the courthouse rotunda, reviewing case notes. A stack of subpoenas clutched in one hand. Her eyes moved quickly, lips pressed tight. Her client, a teenage boy, was being railroaded, and she knew it. But lately, she'd noticed things. Motion requests disappearing, phone calls unreturned, conversations ending the moment she entered a room. That evening, she locked her office earlier than usual. Colleagues noted she looked tired, but focused. One receptionist remembered her, asking if the legal messenger service still operated after 900 p.m. No one asked why. The next morning, her silver Nissan was found parked on the eastbound lane of Cedar Ridge Bridge. Driver's side door ajar, a jacket draped over the front seat. No purse, no phone. Search and rescue dragged the river for 3 days. Her colleagues were shocked. Her sibling refused interviews. Eventually, the town moved on. Evans left the precinct that evening with the file tucked under her arm. She wasn't the kind to jump to conclusions, but some cases had a weight that clung to them, and this one didn't feel like suicide. Sarah Evans didn't expect much from the cold case archive, but even by outdated standards, Jasmine Black's file was startlingly bare. A tan folder, brittle at the corners, no thicker than a court summons. Inside, a 3-page incident report, a 2-sentence witness summary, and a typed conclusion recommending no further investigation. No canvas forms, no forensics report, no timeline, no follow-up notations. She flipped back to the incident report. Jasmine's car had been found by a highway patrol officer around 6:45 a.m.,
parked just shy of the Cedar Ridge Bridge pedestrian gate. Key still in the ignition. Doors unlocked. No purse, no phone. The car was towed and processed as abandoned. No one photographed the interior. One note, hand-scrawled in the margin by an unknown officer, read FBI envelope referred by JB possible misconduct. The envelope wasn't attached. Evans checked the file jacket twice. Nothing. She checked the case status form on the back. Closed. September 4th, 1996. No foul play suspected. Initialed by a captain who'd long since retired. Evans shut the folder, slid it back into the box, and checked the property tag. Labeled inactive. She signed it out for review and carried it to her desk. The evidence lockup was in the basement, a concrete-walled vault lined with shelves of aging cardboard and rusted metal bins. Evans walked slowly down the aisle, passing cases labeled with years, offenses, and city districts. She reached the 1996 archive and located Jasmine's name on a battered white label. Inside was a single envelope. It contained Jasmine's motor vehicle records, a faded photo from her bar application, and a list of open cases at the time of her disappearance. No legal documents or handwritten notes. Nothing that indicated who she'd been or what she might have been working on. She returned the box to the shelf and made a note to pull Jasmine's trial records from court storage instead. Then she drove to Jasmine's last listed next of kin. Rebecca Black answered the door without a smile. She looked to be in her early 40s, younger than Evans expected. Her arms were crossed before she even spoke. "I figured it'd come up again eventually," she said. All it took was a briefcase floating down a river. Sarah introduced herself plainly, offered her card, and waited for an invitation that didn't come. After a long pause, Rebecca opened the screen door and led her into a sparsely furnished living room. "Nothing about the house," suggested Jasmine. "I know what you're going to ask," Rebecca said, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "And the answer is no. She didn't kill herself." Sarah didn't argue. She waited. She was cautious, obsessive, even locked her office, kept duplicates of everything. She wasn't the type to give up. Rebecca paused, then added, "Especially not over work." "Do you remember anything unusual around the time she disappeared?" Evans asked. Rebecca stood and went into the hall, returning with a small taped-up shoebox. She handed it to Sarah. 2 days before she went missing, she had a contractor come to her house. Said the hinge on her evidence safe was damaged. She was nervous. Rebecca added, "I asked her if something was wrong, and she said she stopped the words clearly difficult. She said, 'If anything happens to me, don't believe anything they say.'" Sarah nodded slowly, committing the phrasing to memory. "Did she ever mention specific names, clients, threats?" "No, she didn't talk about that stuff. Said it was safer if I didn't know. She lived alone. Yes, always did." Evans wrote a few more notes, thanked her, and stood to leave. Rebecca walked her to the door, but stopped before she opened it. "I never believed she walked off the bridge. Please get justice for my sister. It's been too long. Do you think Jasmine jumped off that bridge, or was she silenced? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who was Jasmine trying to expose before she disappeared? And will Sarah finally solve this mystery after all these years? Give this video a like and keep watching to find out. Also, comment below where you're tuning in from today. The following day, Sarah sat cross-legged in the municipal archive, surrounded by folders stacked in uneven piles. She had spent the past 2 hours scanning case logs from Jasmine Black's final year in court. One file sat apart from the others, thicker, flagged with red ink at the edges. People v. Lucas Bennett. A 16-page summary detailed the 1996 robbery that ended in the death of off-duty officer David Miller. Lucas Bennett,
17, had been arrested the same night, reportedly found hiding 2 blocks from the liquor store with blood on his sweatshirt and a discarded .38 recovered from a dumpster nearby. The file suggested open and shut, but Jasmine Black had taken the case pro bono, citing irregularities in the arrest report. She had requested suppression hearings, filed motions questioning the chain of custody, demanded officer discipline records. 3 days before jury selection, she disappeared. The trial collapsed. Lucas pled guilty under pressure from a public defender. Sarah flipped to the arrest summary again. 2 names underlined Detective Paul Allen, Detective Michael Foster. She circled them, then checked the incident log from the same precinct, District 42, spanning that same year. Those names came up often, too often. Evans drove north before dawn. Lucas Bennett was now serving a 15-year sentence at Willow Creek Correctional near the Canadian border. The prison exterior was drab and square, each wing designed more for containment than visibility. After clearing the gate, Sarah was led to a side room where inmates met Nan, attorney visitors under supervision. Lucas walked in wearing a beige jumpsuit and a reserved expression. Mid-20s, built lean. He sat opposite her without speaking. The corrections officer gave a nod and stepped aside. "I'm Detective Evans," Sarah said. "I'm reopening Jasmine Black's disappearance." Lucas's gaze broke. He leaned back in the chair, studying her. "You serious?" he said after a moment. "Yes," he exhaled through his nose. "Nobody said that name to me in 10 years. I wanted to talk to you about the last time you saw her." He hesitated. "She said she had something big. When week before trial, maybe 4-5 days before jury pick." Sarah took out a small notebook. "What did she say?" Lucas tapped a finger on the table. "She said the case was rotten, that it wasn't just me, that she was working on something bigger, and if she could break it open, she'd take them down with it." "She say who them was?" He shrugged. "No, but she said cops." "More than one?" Sarah paused. "Did you believe her?" "I didn't have much left to believe in back then," he said. "But yeah, I did." Lucas leaned forward slightly. "She was the only person who looked me in the eye and didn't see a gang kid or a waste of court time." A correctional officer stepped back into the doorway. 2 more minutes." Sarah nodded. "Is there anything else you remember? Anything unusual about her behavior?" "No, that was the last time I met her. I heard what happened after. They probably got to her before she could act." Lucas tapped his fist lightly on the table as she turned to leave. She deserved better than a headline and a closed file. Back at her desk, Sarah pulled the visitor logs for Willow Creek Correctional. The week Lucas had mentioned. No entry for Jasmine Black. No security footage was retained from that year. She requested verification from the warden's office anyway, but she already knew what they'd say. No record, no visit, no oversight. The absence was louder than any paper trail. She then pulled the original court transcripts from People v. Bennett. The suppression hearing motions Jasmine had filed were mentioned, but not attached. The hearing was never held. After Jasmine's disappearance, Lucas had accepted a plea deal to avoid a possible life sentence. Sarah skimmed the court's order to close the case. The judge had noted Jasmine's absence, but made no inquiry into why her files weren't present. There were no continuances requested. The case simply moved on without her. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Something didn't sit right. She returned to the trial transcript and reread the testimonies. The arresting officer, Detective Allen, had claimed Lucas was apprehended after a tip from a neighborhood witness. No witness was ever named. No tip sheet included. The second officer, Foster, provided minimal supplemental detail.
Sarah opened another folder. People vs. Clark, 1995. A different defendant, same detectives. Nearly identical phrasing in the arrest narrative. Witness report, foot chase, gun recovered from alley dumpster. She checked People vs. Davis, also from 95. Again, Alan Foster. Similar narrative. Sarah closed the files and locked them in her cabinet. She had enough to start pulling threads, but it still wasn't clear how many people were holding the rope, or how far they were willing to go to keep it from unraveling. Sarah Evans had filled out the Internal Affairs Records request by noon. Standard process, triple copy, one for her file, one for internal review, one that would disappear into a drawer somewhere at one police plaza. She wasn't holding her breath. She handed the folder to the records liaison, a tired-looking man who barely looked up. "These are sealed reviews," he said. "You'll need clearance. I'm not asking to publish them. Just view the chain of complaints filed against detectives. Allen and Foster, between 1995 and 1997, could take weeks." He replied, already moving the file into a bin marked pending. "Let me know if that suddenly changes." She left without waiting for a response. Evans had worked in enough departments to recognize that weeks didn't mean bureaucratic delay. It meant avoidance. Back at her temporary rental, an old one-bedroom suite above a closed photo studio, she dropped her keys on the counter and opened her laptop. Her inbox was empty. No updates from ballistics. No calls returned from the original court clerks. And nothing from the DA's office about the Bennett motions. She didn't expect movement. She checked the mailbox outside, more out of habit than hope. Inside, among a junk mail flyer and an oil change reminder addressed to the previous tenant, was a plain manila envelope. No return address, no postmark. She opened it on the counter. One photograph slid out. A grainy image, clearly a frame from an old security camera, showed Jasmine Black standing in the hallway of a courthouse. She was facing a woman in clerk uniform, mid-30s, olive complexion, hair back in a tight bun. On the back of the photo, scrolled in blue ink, Santiago, 42nd Precinct. Sarah cross-referenced internal precinct staff logs from 1996. Only one match surfaced. Maria Solano, civilian employee, left the department in early 97. No forwarding address. No employment history under the same name since. After 2 hours of searching motor vehicle records, nursing assistant databases, and tracing a minor name change request filed in Albion County, Sarah found a match. Maria Sanchez. The address linked to a small elder care facility just outside Brookfield. Sarah made the drive the next day, keeping her badge off display. The home was quiet, low-staffed. She checked in under the pretext of asking about a relative. After a few questions, she found Maria in a corner lounge near the back, folding towels beside a woman in a wheelchair. Maria looked older than the photo suggested, thinner, too, and cautious. Sarah approached slowly. "Ms. Sanchez, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need a few minutes of your time." Maria looked up, already wary. "I'm not who you think I am. You worked at the 42nd Precinct. You knew Jasmine Black." The towel slipped from Maria's hands. She didn't answer. Sarah reached into her coat and pulled out the photo. Maria stared at it, then quietly, "You shouldn't have come here. I'm looking into Jasmine's disappearance. Your name came up." Sarah said. She scared them. She said, "That's the truth. A few days before she vanished, I remember her walking in with this envelope. What was in it? I don't know. She wouldn't say, just asked where the commander's inbox was. Said she needed to make sure it got into the right hands. Did it? No.
That envelope never showed up anywhere. I asked a clerk the next day, and they said no such complaint had been logged. Sarah waited. Maria took a long breath. The night before she disappeared, I was walking past the break. I heard Alan say, "If she's got to go, she's got to go." Foster laughed. I didn't stop walking. Did you report it? I transferred out the next week, put in a resignation, changed my name. I didn't wait to be next. Do you remember the name Hector Vega? Maria's expression tightened. He was in holding. I remember the name because it came over dispatched twice. Jasmine said he was helping her. Some kind of confidential informant. He vanished 2 days before she did. Just gone. No record of transfer. No discharge sheet. Nothing. Do you think that's connected? I think it's all connected. Sarah didn't return to her rental right away. She stopped by a gas station, filled up the tank, then parked at a diner down the road, and reviewed her notes for 2 hours. Names, dates, motions, disappearances. When she finally pulled into the parking lot behind her unit, she knew something was off before she even stepped out. Her front passenger tire was half deflated. The rear one was fully flat, not punctured by nails, sliced, clean, and precise. Sarah crouched and checked the treads, both front and back on the right side. She didn't need a forensics kit to recognize what it meant. Someone had been close. Close enough to send a message. Sarah didn't sleep. By morning, she had rerouted her focus entirely back to the briefcase. It wasn't just a recovered item anymore. It was a crime scene. She called in a favor to the regional crime lab in Rutherford and requested a secondary forensic sweep, this time with priority handling. The tech on the phone hesitated. Protocol was to only repeat analysis when specifically prompted by a lead detective or DA. But when Sarah used the phrase, "possible officer-involved homicide," things moved faster. 3 hours later, she was standing in a chilled lab, arms folded, while a pair of forensic technicians worked under focused task lighting. "It's degraded," one of them said, turning the case slowly on a padded tray. "But we can still try swabbing the inner seams and zipper tracks. Sometimes particulate stays caught under the metal teeth." They used fine-tipped brushes and protein markers, gently lifting what residue they could. It took hours. Then a second tech, younger, called from across the room, "You're going to want to see this." They'd pulled a minute but consistent trace of dried epithelial cells from between the zipper folds, cells with intact nuclei, enough for a viable DNA profile. It took one more day to run the match. Sarah sat in her car outside the lab, staring at the windshield until the call came through. The match was clear. Michael Foster. She drove to Saratoga before the ink dried on the lab report. Michael Foster lived in a bland duplex tucked behind a defunct laundromat, the kind of neighborhood where houses looked occupied but rarely stirred. She waited outside until the porch light came on, then stepped out and rang the bell. Foster answered half a minute later, unshaven in jeans and a thermal shirt, eyes scanning past her before settling on the badge. "Detective Evans," she introduced, holding it steady. "I'd like to ask you a few questions about Jasmine Black." He didn't move. "That case is 12 years old. I know. That's why it's surprising your DNA turned up on her briefcase." His expression didn't change, but he stepped back without protest, motioning her inside. The living room was plain. No photos, no clutter, just a recliner and a dusty bookshelf that hadn't been touched in years. Foster sat, leaned forward on his knees. "Look," he said, "I don't know what you think you found." The lab confirmed a match. "We pulled trace DNA, your skin embedded in the zipper seam." He shook his head slowly, as if buying time. Sarah stayed on her feet. That briefcase was found last month in the Wiltshire River. You were never listed in the original file, never interviewed, but Jasmine's sister said she carried that case with her constantly. So, how'd your DNA end up on it? He looked at the floor, then up again. Something behind his eyes gave, I didn't kill her. Then help me understand what happened. There was a long pause. Then he stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. It wasn't supposed to go that far, he said. Alan just wanted to scare her. She was making noise, talking about internal affairs, complaints. Said she had evidence. You confronted her. I waited for her at the parking lot that night. I told her to back off. She wouldn't. I knocked her out, shoved her in her car, and drove off. His voice had flattened out now, a quiet recitation. But she woke up when we got near the bridge. Things got real ugly. She tried to escape, so I had to stop. She swung the briefcase at me, hit my jaw. I grabbed it and threw it. It tumbled down the river. Sarah didn't speak. And then I called Alan, told him it got out of hand. He told me to bring her to him. She was still alive when I left her with him. That was the last time I saw her, where Foster hesitated. There's a place, an old narcotics cabin, north end of the training woods. Not on the maps. Alan used it sometimes. Said it was clean, quiet. Sarah took out her notepad. Address? There's no address. Just off Route 301, half a mile east of an old ranger trail. You'll need dogs. She closed the notepad. You're under arrest, Foster. Obstruction of justice, accessory to murder, and failure to report a crime. To her surprise, he didn't resist. He just nodded and let her cuff him. They booked him at a regional holding facility that night. It was quiet, no press, no leaks. Sarah notified the DA's office and requested a full forensic team for the cabin search. The next morning, she returned to her rental and updated her notes until almost 2 a.m. At 7:14 a.m., her phone rang. It was the desk sergeant from Saratoga. Foster is dead. She sat upright. How? Found hanging in his cell, torn bedsheet tied to a vent. Suicide, that's what they're calling it. Was he placed in isolation? Yes, anyone on shift with ties to the 42nd precinct. The line went quiet. She hung up. The window across from her reflected her face, calm but tightened. Whatever Foster had left unsaid had died with him. Sarah stood at the edge of the clearing as the Warrantine cut through overgrowth with machetes and bolt cutters. The trail off Route 301 had turned nearly invisible from neglect. Her boots sank into soft moss. Every step weighted with Foster's last words. The cabin appeared like a scar in the woods, tilted, weather-beaten, half swallowed by foliage. She circled it slowly, her eyes scanning the terrain. Alan hadn't picked this place by accident. It was forgotten, quiet. A canine unit handler clipped a leash onto his German shepherd and gave the command. The dog darted around the perimeter, nose close to the ground. Another crew began photographing the site and sketching its layout. Sarah stayed out of their way, taking in the perimeter from a higher spot near the tree line. She knew they might find nothing. It had been years. Bones scattered, weather-worn. Soil and time didn't preserve the truth, but something in her gut said Jasmine was here. It was close to dusk when the first alert came. The dog stiffened and began barking sharply, tail rigid, nose fixed on a point halfway down the slope behind the cabin. The handler knelt to mark the spot, calling in the recovery team. Sarah made her way down, her boots slipping slightly in the loose dirt. The slope had been concealed with natural growth, ferns, dry brush, fallen pine limbs. But the dog had caught something. They began excavation carefully. A perimeter was marked. Soil was removed layer by layer with towels and brushes. It took 2 hours before one of the techs stood up and called out quietly, "We have textile." Sarah moved to the edge of the dig. A flash of dull maroon cloth peeked through the dirt, clinging to decomposed fragments of fabric. Nearby, brittle bone, a femur, then ribs. They worked in silence as the remains were uncovered. A woman's skeletal body wrapped in a torn trench coat, partially mummified by the soil. Sarah looked at the color of the coat, deep wine red. Rebecca had mentioned Jasmine wore it the day she vanished. A cracked wristwatch. Both bagged for cataloguing. Back at the regional lab, the remains underwent a full examination. The fractures were consistent with an assault, not an accident. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Evans, confirmed what Sarah suspected. She fought back. There are defensive fractures on the ulna, and we found epithelial tissue embedded under the nail beds. Sarah looked up. Viable enough to run a profile. We're fast-tracking the results. By the time the DNA report hit her desk, Sarah Evans already knew what it would say. Skin fragments recovered from under Jasmine Black's fingernails were a match for Detective Paul Allen. The forensic confirmation didn't spark a celebration. It just narrowed the field. She stood in the lab hallway for a long moment after reading the report, jaw set, eyes unfocused. Back at the precinct, she typed the warrant application with methodical precision. She included a supplemental request for a sealed indictment. She didn't want this leaking, not before she was ready. The DA signed off without hesitation. He'd seen enough. Sarah called in her task force, just 5 names, all hand-picked. 2 internal affairs agents she trusted, a federal marshal, a forensic analyst, and a seasoned officer from her prior post in Syracuse. They met in a back conference room at 7:30 p.m., doors locked. "We have one shot at this," she told them. "Alan knows the system. He's used it to stay clean, but he's not clean anymore." She laid out the arrest plan, the routes, the risk. No press, no leaks. When we move quiet. The next morning, before the task force could roll out, Alan vanished. When Sarah got the alert, she was already en route to brief the marshals. A detective from 1st Precinct called her personally. He was seen leaving his house this morning, not alone. Who with? 2 guys. One's retired narcotics, other one's been off duty since a use of force complaint last year. We ID'd them both. Leo Kane and Samuel Reed. Both names had surfaced before in internal affairs reports. Suppression of evidence, unofficial surveillance, intimidation. Send the footage. I want time stamp, direction, plates. Sarah watched the clip 3 times before saying anything. Alan looked calm. The men with him didn't rush. The Ford pulled out of his driveway just past dawn, heading north. She issued the bolo herself. By noon, the U.S. Marshals were looped in. Border checkpoints were quietly alerted. It wasn't a manhunt. Not yet, but it was close. The Ford was spotted by an LPR scanner 3 hours later, just south of Pinehaven. Sarah was already in the air by then. She landed in Watertown and was driven across the border zone to coordinate with the local intercept team. The bolo had worked. A customs agent recognized the plates at a secondary checkpoint and called it in. The Ford was pulled over 20 meters from the Canadian crossing in a wooded turnout. Off Route 9, Sarah and the marshals approached with caution. Guns were drawn, not raised. The 2 officers stepped out first, palms open. "Get out of the car, Paul." It took a few seconds, but eventually Alan emerged. His jacket was zipped, his expression unreadable. "You really brought the whole show," he muttered. "It's over." No resistance, no outbursts. Alan was cuffed and seated in the back of the lead vehicle.
The other 2 men were taken into custody without incident. Sarah didn't speak again until they were on the highway headed back toward the city. She turned slightly in her seat to look at him. "We found her." Alan didn't blink. "I figured you might." The ride back was long but not silent. Sarah flipped through the contents of a secondary folder on her lap. Copies of Jasmine's cassette transcript, the forensic summary, and a log of Alan's prior misconduct allegations. She wasn't sure if he noticed, but she laid it out deliberately, 1 page at a time. Alan shifted only once. "You think this gets you a win?" Sarah didn't answer. The car drove on. The moment they arrived at the precinct, Alan was interrogated. The steel door clicked shut behind Sarah Evans. Alan was already seated, cuffed, posture loose, like he was waiting on a dentist rather than a murder charge. He barely looked at her as she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down, laying her file on the table without a word. "So," Alan said, leaning back, "this is the part where you try to scare me with something you think you know." Sarah studied him for a moment. "No, this is the part where I show you what we've proven." He smirked, unimpressed. "You've got nothing. A dead woman's voice and a bag of mold. It's all speculation." Sarah didn't respond. She reached into the file folder and pulled out the small cassette recorder. The casing had been cleaned, the tape inside rewound and copied. She pressed play. The voice that filled the room was faint, static-laced, but unmistakable. Alan Foster, informant threats, vaguer, forged statements. If I disappear, it was them. Alan's eyes flicked toward the recorder. For a split second, his confidence faltered, but it came back quickly, hardening. "That's your smoking gun. You think some half-audible whisper from a paranoid lawyer's going to hold up." Sarah opened the folder on the table and slid a page toward him. It's not just her voice anymore. Alan didn't touch the page. He just stared at her. "We recovered this from her sister's house. Jasmine left a note, said she was keeping a second copy in case something happened. The note was dated 2 weeks before she vanished." She laid out the contents slowly. A second cassette, affidavit, typed, signed. Copies of the forged witness statements used in Lucas Bennett's trial. And finally, a list of names. Officers, supervisors, even a DAR liaison. All tied to cases with a pattern of falsified evidence or coerced testimony. Sarah kept her voice level. "You forged the statement that placed Lucas Bennett at the scene. The officer who was killed, Officer Quinn, had threatened to go to internal affairs about you. Jasmine found out. That's why you shut her down." Alan's jaw tightened. His smirk was gone. Sarah didn't blink. "She named you on tape, on paper, in front of witnesses. She told your story before you could bury it. You just didn't dig deep enough." He stared at the table, unmoving. "We've already handed the materials over to the district attorney's office. A grand jury is being convened. You're being charged with murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to falsify evidence, and destruction of protected materials." 2 uniformed officers entered the room on cue. One of them walked behind Alan and unlatched his cuffs from the table. The other stepped forward and secured his wrists behind his back. Alan said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the folder, but something in his posture shifted, stiffened. The officers walked him out. Sarah stood alone in the room, hands on the edge of the table. She stared at the recorder, still sitting in the center, like it had been waiting to be heard this whole time. The press conference room at the district attorney's office was filled to capacity. Sarah stood to the side of the podium, arms crossed, the weight of everything she'd uncovered resting heavy on her spine. Dar Erica Stone took the mic. Her voice was calm but unmistakably firm. "A grand jury has returned indictments
in the case of Jasmine Black, the attorney who disappeared in 1996 under circumstances we now understand to be murder and obstruction of justice. A low murmur rolled through the room. Paul Allen has been charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit obstruction, and destruction of evidence. Michael Foster, now deceased, has been named posthumously in obstruction and accessory to murder. 3 additional former officers, Samuel Reed, Leo Kane, and Jessica Ford, have been indicted for their roles in wrongful convictions tied to fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. Sarah kept her face composed, but she could feel the press glancing her way. When Stone gestured for her to step forward, she approached the mic slowly. Jasmine Black was a lawyer, a sister, and a tireless advocate for her clients. Sarah said she risked everything to speak truth to power. Her voice was silenced, but her evidence remained, and it was her voice on tape that reopened the door. She paused, looking into the crowd. Justice took too long. Upstate in a correctional facility that had seen too many broken men, Lucas Bennett stood in his cell, eyes on the clock above the guard station. He'd stopped counting the years a while ago, but he hadn't stopped waiting. The metal door clanged open. A guard motioned. "Pack up. You're being released." Lucas didn't move at first. For what? Conviction vacated. They found new evidence. "You're cleared." When he stepped outside an hour later, the sun hit his face like a foreign warmth. He didn't smile, didn't run, just looked up, blinking against the brightness. Sarah was waiting near the gate. She held out a small manila envelope. "Bus fare, prepaid phone, hotel room for the night. There's a legal aid group that wants to help you get set up." He nodded slowly, the envelope still in her hand. "She believed me," he said finally. "All this time I thought maybe she gave up." "She didn't," Sarah said, "and neither did you." The cemetery sat on a quiet hillside just past the edge of town. The grounds were manicured, rows of identical stones arranged in symmetry, but one stood apart, freshly installed, the granite still bright beneath the morning sky. Jasmine Black. Sarah Evans stood a few paces back, coat collar turned up against the wind. Beside her were Lucas Bennett and Rebecca Black. A bouquet of white lies rested at the base of the headstone left by someone earlier. Rebecca carried a single rose they approached in silence. Lucas stepped forward first. He crouched and placed the rose on the stone. "Thank you for giving me my life back, for standing up for me," he said, his voice low. He stood slowly, wiping at one eye. Rebecca followed. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the engraved letters. "You won, Jasmine. Rest easy," she whispered. Sarah remained still, her gaze fixed on the name etched in stone. Before leaving, Sarah paused, pulling a folded envelope from her coat pocket. It was a photocopy of Jasmine's original complaint to Internal Affairs, the one they'd found buried beneath layers of silence and time. She looked at the paper, then at the grave. "You fought the right fight," she said. "We heard you. Justice is served." She tucked the copy under a stone at the edge of the grave. It wouldn't last long against the elements, but it wasn't meant to. It was a gesture, a full circle. Lucas and Rebecca waited near the path. Sarah joined them as they walked down the slope, leaving Jasmine behind for the last time. No one spoke. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to uncover, only the truth that had been fought for, and the woman who had never stopped fighting. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.